You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
Did you know they built a Paris in China? Because I had no idea. I was watching the internets the other day, and the algorithm serves me up this video, and it's a remarkable video of some Americans visiting China where they built a scale replica of Paris. That's a slight exaggeration. It's not a one-for-one or anything. The Eiffel Tower isn't as big, but it's meant to look like the best of Paris, like how you would imagine Paris, but not in the way that Las Vegas would do it, like where it's a casino or something like that. They built it as a city to be lived in and master planned to feel all Parisian by vibe. And in the video I watched, I think they were Americans, they went and checked the whole thing out, and it was super empty. Because even though all kinds of money got dumped into this thing, and even though it's amazing to look at, and I think a very appealing place to go and live, I mean, if you live in China, I think that'd be really neat. Even though all of that's the case, hardly anybody lives there. And one of the big challenges, apparently, has been getting people to move in, to buy property there, to buy into the idea. So these Chinese developers built it, but the people did not come, Ray. The people most definitely did not come. Likewise, in Nehemiah chapter 7, there's another problem that nobody saw coming here at the completion of the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, and that is underpopulation. They built a real cool town, and the real cool town has got great walls around it now. There are springs and wells available. The water's covered. The security's covered. All of the religious ritual is covered. Apparently there's some sort of citadel there. So there's going to be the possibility of having a garrison to keep an eye on things. I mean, it's a great place to live by ancient world standards, but people don't live there. And it's an interesting reflection on the situation, because the question of building houses in this town has been an issue that goes all the way back to the beginning of the rebuilding efforts that we talked about all the way back at the beginning of Ezra. First, let's just look at, there's a Bible passage. I want to read you the Bible thing. Just a second. I got to move some stuff around. All right, here we go. Nehemiah 7:4. Nehemiah has appointed gatekeepers and singers and Levites, and he put Hananiah and Hananiah in charge of everything. He told the gatekeepers how they're going to do stuff. The residents of Jerusalem, they're all going to keep guard at times, some at their own posts, some near their own houses. All very interesting. Now, verse 4. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. Well, why not? You've been there for better part of 100 years, 80 years at this point. The people have been back. And in their defense, it was a ruin when they got there, when they started their return under the leadership of the descendant of David, Zerubbabel, who led everybody back there at the beginning of the book of Ezra, starting in 538 BC under the blessing of Achaemenid Persian king Cyrus the Great. And they were starting from scratch. I mean, the only people who'd been left behind by Nebuchadnezzar, who took them into exile in the first place in 586 BC, were some vine dressers and plowmen, a few hill people who just kept an eye on it or something, maybe produced the tiniest bit of revenue for Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. It seems like more or less the Babylonians were content to salt the fields and leave Jerusalem to ruin, kind of the same way the Romans were content to do that with Carthage after the Punic Wars. So to be fair, they were starting from more or less nothing. Very few bricks were even still standing on top of other bricks, and greenery and the earth, nature had taken things back over. They really were starting from pretty close to nothing when they went back to rebuild 80 years before the events we're reading about here. But if you read a little ways into Ezra, you discover that everyone's first impulse was to clear the vines and the wreckage and start building not just normal houses, little hovels and thatched roof cottages for themselves, but instead they wanted to build fancy schmancy houses in the Persian style, paneled houses, as a matter of fact. And Ezra 5 talks about their overzeal in trying to get back and rebuild their houses as being part of the problem in getting everything finished with the building of the temple. They were too zealous for their own houses and weren't zealous enough for the house of God. And this is a nod. Well, you're going to have to read between the lines a little bit, but stick with me here. Ezra 5:1. Now Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet, a descendant of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, son of Jozadak, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, helping them. And to me, it feels a little bit like helping them is a bit of a euphemism there for kicking them in the butt repeatedly, verbally. Haggai is very specific about exactly what the problem is. So again, Ezra 5, what we just looked at, names Haggai and Zechariah, two prophets specifically. Both of those guys get a book of the Bible with their name on it. And so what Haggai and Zechariah said to the people is written down in their respective books. And that's where I get the business about them being too obsessed with their paneled houses. Let's just go from the beginning of Haggai chapter 1. In the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. This is what the Lord Almighty says, quote, "These people say the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built," unquote. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai, quote, "Is it a time for yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains in ruin?" Unquote. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says, quote, "Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, but only to put them in a purse with holes in it." Unquote. This then is what the Lord Almighty says, quote, "Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build the house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored," unquote, says the Lord. Quote, "You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Declares the Lord Almighty. Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands." Unquote. Verse 12. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent them, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people, quote, "I am with you, declares the Lord." So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty their God on the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of King Darius. And that's the end of Haggai chapter 1. So something happened there generationally. The words of Haggai got through the armor. They affected the people. And we've seen that, haven't we, throughout all of Ezra and Nehemiah? These people aren't impossible to deal with. They're not like how awful they often were during the divided kingdom eras where, I mean, they would just completely blow off God, and the prophets openly mock the instructions of God, the law of God. It's weird. They didn't even act like God was actually their God for huge chunks of time. But to their credit, they've been chastened. They've been humbled. Their temple got knocked over. Their city got ruined. They got taken away into captivity and had to live out an entire generation over there. And now they have an opportunity to come back and take another shot at it. And they're trying. They're trying to learn from the past. Is it perfect? No. Are they completely unified? No. Do they have clarity of vision? No. Are they a little bit Persianified and have lost a bit of their identity and don't have the clearest sense of who they are? Yeah, that is an issue, but they're trying and it's coming together. And so understandably, resistance cropped up early on in the book of Ezra to the rebuilding of the temple, and things ground to a halt. It got bad. But, along come Haggai and Zechariah, and they're like, hey, don't wave the white flag here and just go build your Persian-style house so you feel like you're back home. It's sort of a desire to turn back to Egypt kind of metaphor here. Don't make that mistake that your ancestors made in the desert. Set your attention toward building this house. Here's a direct word from the Lord that says, do it. Well, I think it got through the armor. I think these people heard it. And I suspect they might have passed that lesson along to their kids and them to their kids to say, we think that maybe God doesn't want us to build a bunch of houses here, or at least if we do, maybe don't make them super nice. It looks like there was perhaps ambiguity on the back end of that prophecy where maybe they felt like God never came back and was like, okay, now you can build paneled houses. And maybe that, coupled with the economic oppression that the people of Jerusalem had suffered under from their fellow brethren, the Jewish nobles who were around, maybe those two things together added up to a lack of housing crisis, a lack of motivation to rebuild the city home by home by family home. And now you've got a situation where you've got this amazing city, a city attached to a promise, a city with walls and gates, but the people haven't been rebuilt. In a metaphor or an obvious illustration or example of them not having been rebuilt yet is that they barely have houses. The population of this city is sparse, but the city is important, and it needs to be not sparse, and that's Nehemiah's vision for the whole big, grand picture of things. And next time around, well, Nehemiah's a problem solver, so you can guess. He's going to try to solve the problem, and we're going to see how he comes at it, starting in Nehemiah 7:5. I'm going to see if Jeff can find that China Paris video. If so, we're going to link it down below. You should go check that out. It's pretty wild. It's pretty fun. Okay, that's plenty. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support. We're grateful because that supports our family.